All right.
Hey, starting right on the
Hey,
glitch.
that's
Hey,
okay.
we're
Hey,
back.
welcome back. We missed you last week.
I actually, you know what? I was about to say I missed this, but I'm gonna be honest. I was having a blast last week. I did not think about this at all.
That's
I
okay.
hope you guys had fun.
We missed you, in case anybody was wondering.
Well, it is good to be back, though. I do love doing this. Welcome to GPS Live for the week of July 7th, 2023. I am Tristan Morris.
And I'm Jonathan Singer.
And we are here to talk about some cybersecurity news and stuff. But before we go into any news and stuff, we're going to go ahead and put up our disclaimer. Our opinions are our own. We don't necessarily reflect the views of GuidePoint Security officially. We're just two dudes talking about cyber stuff and having a good time with each other because we enjoy each other's company.
Yeah.
How was your week, Jonathan? How was your last week?
Well, it was over here in the United States of America, Independence Day, 4th of July. So we had a nice, somewhat of a short week. It feels like a lot of people were out. That gave me
Yeah,
some time to relax and enjoy some time with my family and my close friends,
yeah,
and just kind of hang out, jump in the pool a little bit. It is over 90 degrees here in Florida these days. So yeah,
yeah,
man.
yeah. We've had some pretty hot by Seattle standards days over the last week, and man, has July 4th made it really feel tough to get back into the swing of work. Everything feels fake. Like I'm working on stuff, and I'm like, this doesn't feel like real life. Um, but stuff still happened. To
A
quote one of my
lot
favorite,
happened.
yeah,
A lot happened this week. I started messaging you
a lot.
stories back on Tuesday. The
Yeah,
crazy things were happening already.
when we were still off for the federal holiday, you
Okay,
were messaging me things.
okay. Sorry, I live cyber. Like this is all I know how to do.
The commitment is real, but we've got a lot of stories to cover. So why don't we dive right into them, starting with the very story that you messaged me, that you sent to me on Tuesday about Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, also known as TSMC. What happened?
Yeah, man. This is like, just in case anybody is wondering, TSMC, you've probably heard about it in the news. You may have seen it in some article somewhere. This is like that big company that everybody should be aware of.
Yeah.
They are pretty much one of the largest semiconductor or microchip manufacturers in the world. In fact, they supply microchips to some of the biggest devices like, Apple. And what happened is last Friday, they were apparently informed that there was a ransom over their head from Lockbit,
Yeah.
asking for $70 million, all because an upstream provider, most actually more specifically one of their IT hardware suppliers, experienced a cybersecurity incident, and therefore some of the data that they were holding on TSMC was then leaked to these bad parties. So the story goes.
Yeah, there is a lot of back and forth, kind of he said, she said, kind of stuff going on. With this story, TSMC is claiming no, we were not breached. It was our IT provider that was breached. The IT provider is claiming no, there wasn't actually that bad of a breach. No real data was exposed, just baseline configurations for servers when we sent them, not like what their current configurations are, which would not lead then to TSMC itself being breached, but Lockbit is claiming that they have in fact breached TSMC, and are claiming that they originally it was a 7-day deadline from when they received the ransom that has now been extended out to August 6th, I think, or something like that. So they ended up giving them a full month to comply. But Lockbit is claiming, hey, if you don't pay this ransom, not only are we going to release some of these files, we're also going to release the ways that we were able to access your network and the passwords and everything that we use to be able to do that, which would be catnip for any other attackers out there. Because as you mentioned, TSMC is massive. You're looking at the semiconductor manufacturing plant for Apple, that if you gain access to that kind of information and you can go over some of the high value information that would be present on those servers, I mean, you're looking at potential exploits, like hardware level exploits and flaws for Apple devices, and also a bunch of other companies that utilize them. Apple is just one of the most well known.
Yeah, anybody who's kind of rolling their own silicon these days outside of probably Intel is most likely using TSMC in some way or fashion.
Yeah.
And this particular IT hardware supplier is no stranger to the industry at large. In fact, they're fairly large. I'm not even going to go out calling them. If you want to look it up in the dark reading article, you can. But they service a number of other large major technology players, including people in
Yeah.
the firewall, wireless, networking, PC manufacturing, and software industries. So,
Yeah.
because of this third party risk now happening, any information that's stored within their environment, which, like you said, they downplayed the seriousness of the breach, saying it was only engineering test environment and system
Yeah.
installation preparation information. They later came back to a future statement and said that we do apologize and well, sincerest apologies and regarding the leaked information.
Which may have
And that
caused some inconvenience.
so there's a lot of inconvenience right now
Yeah.
when your name is being dragged through the mud. But there's a big lesson here, right? This is not necessarily a new concept in the sense that an individual corporation themselves are being compromised, but it's a
Right.
lot sometimes these third party vendors, this third party risk aspect that comes into play of do you know who also has your data that you're sharing with, who has access to your network, to your inventory, to your systems,
Yeah.
to your APIs, and do they follow good security? I mean, oftentimes it's a self-audited checkbox.
And
And,
in a
and
world
you'll
of
do anything.
expanding, in a world of expanding, governance and data privacy laws, and regulations, right? Knowing exactly who you're working with and are they following those same laws and regulations is going to be incredibly important, because that shared risk that we're all kind of falling under there, right? If your company gets breached because someone that you chose to work with practiced bad cybersecurity or didn't follow regulations, right? Does the buck stop with that other company? Or do you also share in the blame for the fact that you didn't properly audit and properly attest and properly assess that, hey, they are, you didn't do those checks to make sure that they were following the right regulations,
You're
right?
right.
That it's going to be a mired mess as these
Well,
laws continue to expand.
let's take this opportunity to hear from some of our viewers. What do you think is kind of one of those challenges that you just described there, Tristan, which has to do with the responsibility of, do you have to watch your third party upstream suppliers and vendors? Can
Yeah.
you trust that they're doing it well? And, aligning maybe with some different standards, different software suites, different, governance programs to help figure this out. So we'd love to hear any of the comments. In fact, we're already seeing some coming in. Thank you, Robbie.
Yeah.
Yeah, in your experience, you shared with us that you saw a 3-day outage because of a logistics provider, having
Yeah.
a ransom attack, and it's little things like that that either they have data on you, they have access to your network, or they're just critical to the success of your business. Uh,
Yeah.
and it really just kind of plays into something. I had a crazy thought there and I completely lost it. Hopefully it'll come back to me
It'll
here
come
in
back
a
to
little
you.
bit. Oh, I
This
was gonna say you
right.
don't want to feel like a walking target.
Right.
Anyways,
A crazy thought, a really crazy thought, John. Yeah, this story, before we move on, and again, thank you, Robbie, for sharing your experience on, when one supplier is impacted, it goes down the line, and what your comment made me think of there, Robbie, is actually this comes at a critical time for Apple too, because they just announced their $3,500 headset. Right, they're jumping into the VR, augmented reality
I got your
space.
headset right here.
Their
Boom.
their headset's going to cost $3,500. It was kind of this big, this big kerfuffle when they announced it, because we were like, I can't afford to pay new computer prices for what is just a display essentially, with some fancy tech inside of it. But if TSMC is manufacturing any parts for that, right, they already had to downgrade their expectations for how many of these they were going to manufacture and sell. And now their major semiconductor supplier is suffering a ransomware attack. Right, these things have knock-on effects all the way down the line. So it'll be interesting to see if this impacts or delays the cost or shipping of that headset at all. But
Yeah. No.
that was just an aside there for that. Speaking of things that have to do with your face,
That's thank you.
our next story, the TSA is expanding their facial recognition pilot program. This story, I had to close out the article. I had to copy and paste it out and close it out because the ads on the site were just, I mean, they were making my browser move like it was running through molasses. But so I don't have the source anymore. Do you remember who the
It's coming to us from Fast Company.
Fast Company. All right. So the TSA has been running a pilot program at 25 airports for a little bit now, using facial recognition software to automatically one-to-one facial recognition match your face to your ID. And it had pretty high accuracy, according to the TSA.
97%.
What was that?
97% is what they're claiming across demographics, including those marginalized groups.
Yes, so that's pretty good. 3% is still more of a margin of error than I want when it comes to, hey, do you wind up making your flight, or do you wind up in a locked room waiting for someone to come talk to you
with the gloves on?
Yeah, but they've been running this pilot program for a little bit. They're expanding it now pretty rapidly. They're going to be expanding to other airports, but they're also expanding a program that did one-to-N facial mapping. So basically comparing your face to a massive list of government databases, and anything that they have, any kind of biometric data that they have on you, so that you wouldn't even have to pull out your ID to go through security. Now, this may not seem like so much of a cybersecurity conversation right on its face, aside from the ethical questions that exist around biometric data and scanning, and the fact that it doesn't really seem optional. You have the option of declining this, but it seems as optional as when they tell you that you have to go through the full body scanner, right? You don't want to raise a fuss because then it looks potentially bad for you. But the big thing about this one is that the TSA is not being forward at all about where they're getting their facial recognition technology from. You can trace back to find some different vendors that they have signed massive contracts with, but of course those vendors aren't going to speak about it either. But also, they're not releasing any information on what their audit process is for this. They're doing all internal analysis and all internal testing, and they're not opening up that analysis to third-party attestation. So there's no way to know if these numbers are actually accurate, if they're actually seeing these results. And because of that, there's also no way to know that, I guess, that chain of custody of this information has been properly followed. They say that all the data is deleted as soon as one person steps up, the next person comes up and it deletes all the biometric data for the last person. And that when the system is shut off at the end of the day, it deletes it all. But they still had to send a bunch of data somewhere to do this testing. They still had to send a bunch of data back to, I believe it was the Department of Defense, maybe. What did I see that in the article? To do some cross-referencing.
Yeah, so it was Department of Homeland Security.
Okay, yeah.
So to kind of expand on that, right? They're looking at growing from their 25 to 430 airports in the next couple of years. And with that in mind, as you mentioned, they're mostly starting with that what we call that known traveler, people that have pre-check, for instance. Exactly. The idea is you don't have to pull out your ID anymore. When you get to the thing, it will scan your face and see that you are a pre-check user already, cross-reference it with their database from when they initially took your picture to get your pre-check information, or I guess your driver's license potentially too. Yeah. But the idea is, okay, great, you are who you look like. We don't need to see your ID, just move along. But yeah, I think it's that one-to-many aspect where they're then going to take your data and throw it back against some databases. They're going to take your data, and until literally this week, that biometric data was sent off to the Department of Homeland Security
Yep.
research wing. On top of the fact that they claim that the data is removed immediately and or when it's shut down at the end of the day, the computer systems, whatever they may be. But you mentioned, where is the accountability? Where is the validity in the auditing? If it's hidden and done internally, why can't a third party review it? There's also a component of the article that got into an aspect of that opt out aspect, and we may already be familiar with the term opt out when it comes to airports because of the scanners and stuff like that to opt out and have a manual check. But there also apparently is an opt out for the facial scanning too. And the TSA says that signs were set up in the lines and in various places to say, you are about to be facial scanned. If you choose not to, please notify us. But a small research performed by the Algorithmic Justice League started asking travelers, did you see any signs? Were
Yeah.
you
Were
at
you
all informed
informed
that you
at
can
all?
opt out? Yeah. And tell us just about the experience, right? Was there the idea of consent where you just kind of cold it, you need to do this, right? And it majority of the folks, and I'm talking, I don't know what is, I can't percent,
60 out of
but
67.
yeah, out of 67
A
question
little under
said
90%.
they had no idea that it was even a consideration. They basically just felt like they were pushing their way through and following, and
Yeah.
that it happened so quickly. So
And
right,
we've got some comments coming in that are raising some fair points here. Hey, I had a fingerprint on my phone, says one of our commenters. I'm sorry, your information didn't come through with your comment here, but I had a fingerprint on my phone, and then I burned my finger, and it no longer recognized my fingerprint. So what happens if you have any form of cosmetic surgery, anything that alters your face enough that that biometric kind of print, no longer matches? That 97% accuracy starts to look a little bit off at that point.
yeah,
So what happens then? And another commenter, Corinne, said, "Oh, so no more grumpy TSA agents," but it's specifically because of that scenario that we're still gonna have to have people sitting there.
yeah,
And also because you do have the option to opt out, they're still gonna have to have these security agents sitting there. I don't really know that this is going to speed up the process or make it more accurate than human recognition, right? That, like, I don't see the kind of cost benefit here to, I have to give up my biometric data every time I want to get on a plane, to just showing my face to a TSA agent who also,
yeah.
TSA agents are pretty bored. I am almost 100% guaranteed that my biometric data leaves their brain the second I'm no longer standing in front of them.
Look, having biometric data collected at airport is not necessarily a new concept. We have seen
Right.
this with airlines already as part of the check-in process, as some ramping up in particular airlines here in the United States. On top of the fact that until this week, as mentioned, data was technically being saved and leaving the network, which does
Yeah.
imply that the systems are connected online, which is always a risk in itself. This is not an air-gapped scenario. And on top of the fact that there isn't any bit of clarity of what is being done with your data. I don't know. I have pre-check. I haven't flown in a bit. I guess I'll find out what happens to me when I visit the airport.
Yeah.
All I know is it's not very often that I get the super secret pat down. But for those in our comments that are mentioning that they appreciate opting out, good on you,
Yeah.
especially if it doesn't make you look suspicious, because there are a lot of folks that do feel like when they voice their opinion, it flags them as a potential threat.
Yeah.
And so, anyhow, that's some of my thoughts around it.
So moving on
Ha!
to our next
You're on a
story.
roll.
This one, Jonathan, I'm going to turn over to you because you have been a little bit more, you've been paying closer attention to the details of this one than I have.
I have. I've been following the MOVEit debacle very closely, and I call it that because it seems like almost every single week we're being informed of a new vulnerability and a new patching process. So, welcome back to the week of the first week of July. Yesterday, I believe, so July 6th, we've received some details regarding a service pack patching a new CVE for those playing along at home. It's 2023-36934. It is indeed another SQL injection vulnerability. And again, for those playing along at home, SQL injection implies that you have the ability to pass through query data from a web interface, as an example, directly to the database and perform SQL commands. That's never good. There was also several other vulnerabilities that were patched in the process. And for those viewers of ours that like to participate in bug bounties, apparently the parent company behind MOVEit has a bug bounty. Go find it, because you can probably get paid a good amount of money with how often
Yeah.
these vulnerabilities are getting dropped.
Yeah, it has been a real roller coaster, and it's one of those things where I'm not entirely. I mean, I'm mostly sure that like there is more happening here than is
Mhm.
normal with Move It, but it's also kind of one of those things where I'm like, is this kind of thing happening all the time, and we just don't pay attention to it because it doesn't like become kind of the zeitgeist of cybersecurity media at the moment. But there's just been a real roller coaster. It's been a push and pull with Move It on critical vulnerabilities being released and patched back and forth constantly, and almost every single one of them is making the rounds on cybersecurity blogs and on news sources, because everyone is really focused on Move It right now. But it does bring for me that kind of like, how much of that is just the focus, the fact that we're paying so much attention to it, and how much of that is always happening behind the scenes. Like if there hadn't been a massive exploit of these vulnerabilities early on in the year to draw attention to it, would we even care about these stories and these vulnerabilities at all? And obviously I don't think that we would, right? We never would have picked up on it. But it is incredibly interesting to see this kind of like rapid back and forth. It seems like week by week it is just exploit patch, exploit patch, exploit patch, and trying to stay on top of those things is mine. I'm really glad that I'm not on the practicing side of cybersecurity anymore. I'm on the no stuff side.
I never thought I would say that either, but I'm so great I am not on the practicing side anymore. Um, but no, like you're right. It's this particular one has been a serious cat and mouse game of patch discovery on a weekly basis. It almost feels like there's some bigger things going on. And yes, there's still plenty of vulnerabilities that are happening on a daily basis out there with a number of different products that can lead to a larger enterprise compromise, right?
Yeah.
This kinds of stuff, just because it sounds like we're accessing a database of a particular piece of software, still allows the potential of remote code execution, landing files on that remote system, shells, access to the connected network. I mean, it can really be escalated from there. But you know, while we're keeping an eye on time, there was a lot of other things that did happen this week too. Do you want to tell us about some of the nicer
Well,
aspects of this week?
yeah, so we've got some great stuff. So one of the stories that I found that I wanted to draw some attention to, because it's some good news, but it's also important from a corporate cybersecurity perspective, due to some other recent developments. Mastodon, which is
Hmm.
an up and coming social media platform, has released patches for several critical vulnerabilities that were present in their system. The way that Mastodon works is it's essentially, like Twitter, like this kind of microblogging platform. But their big push when they first came out years ago was that they were decentralized. So anyone could set up and run a Mastodon server. You join a server, that server can communicate with all the other Mastodon servers, and you can follow people on other servers. But because there's no central point of failure, there's also no central point of censorship or of control that could be taken over any of this, right? So if you didn't like what you were seeing from users, that was, you just don't follow those users, right? That was the way that it went. But the reason this is important is because Meta, parent company of Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, just this week released Threads, which is their Twitter competitor. It is remarkably similar to Twitter, but it is using that same backend infrastructure setup as Mastodon. It's not the same obvious service because it is decentralized, but they're using that same backend structure. And so because I see Threads probably being one of the next large platforms that companies are going to flock to, it's important to be aware that these vulnerabilities exist, that Mastodon is taking care of them on their end, but then to be looking and saying, hey, could that same thing be happening at Threads? And how is that going to impact my company? But the good news is Mastodon is on top of this and they are patching these things. Other things that have happened really quickly. What were some of our others that we had? There was some other bad news stuff,
We
malware, some
have
more
the
ransomware.
Kira ransomware.
But that's the last
Luckily,
one that we want to stop on. Yeah.
okay, fine. I will mention two other quick stories here then. So first off, talking about upstream providers, we're getting news out of Japan, in fact, this week that the port of I'm gonna kill this one, port of Nagoya, um, is finally resumed operations after being taken offline by also Lockbit. They seem to be quite active. What's
Yeah.
important about this particular port is this is basically the largest port in the area, and it also happens to service Toyota, who exports all their vehicles all over the world. Now, with the
Robbie,
port
is
being
there any
taken off,
chance that your that your shipping operations were impacted by this one?
I hope not.
I hope not.
But yeah, it is considered the biggest port in Japan in terms of annual cargo revenue, and it handles 10,000 pieces of cargo a day. Auto parts make up a large portion of that, almost 40% of that. And so, with a port being down, tens of thousands of pieces of cargo are not able to make their way out. And so, it took a couple days, it sounds like, to get the system back up and running.
Yeah.
But this is just another example of one of those scenarios where, like your logistics company, Robbie, in our comments, this particular one couldn't deliver vehicles to the rest of the world,
Yeah.
um, amongst other things that are coming out of the port of Japan, like, I don't know, Japanese things. So, uh,
And then the
so
other
that's
story,
kind of, yeah.
we're running
Uh,
out of time. We're running out of time. Rapid fire, rapid fire, rapid fire.
Rapid fire. I found this very interesting, but there's a Medusa stealer that's making its way around hitting Windows systems that targets, let me get this right, 97 different browser variants, 19 different password manager variants, 76 different crypto wallets, and your Steam library. It's basically an info stealer dropping its way, and it's a really exhaustive list of data that this thing is pulling off of a Windows system as soon as it lands and it's sending back. Now, this is one of those pay to play pieces of malware. They charge about $200 a month to have access to the platform to help collect information, since it is kind of this SaaS service
Given
for
the
the
amount
Medusa
that it's
Stealer.
collecting, that seems paltry. that seems like that seems like nothing compared to like the damage that this thing could do if it landed in the right environment.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, I've probably heard of majority, I haven't heard of majority of these web browsers, but it's basically eating all of the cookie data, the browser history data, the login data, all that other fun
Yeah.
stuff. Very dangerous stuff. And then, all right, I'll let you kind of clear us up with this, ransomware fix that seems to be making its way now.
Our great news for the day, what we're going to end on and send you off into your weekend with, is that Avast
Avast.
has released a free decryptor for Akira ransomware. Akira made their debut earlier this year in March. They've been active since then. Pretty nasty ransomware group. But Avast has released a free decryptor. So if you get hit by them, it is a pretty straightforward process. You grab the decryptor from them onto a clean machine. You put that on a clean machine, and then you take a encrypted version of a file and the clean version of that file. So if you have a backup where you can access that, the larger the file, the better. Because that gives them more data to work with. But you put both of those into the decryptor program, and it will figure out exactly exactly how that file was encrypted, what the exact key was for that, and give it to you so that you can decrypt the rest of your system. That is great news, especially considering the fact that Akira's ransomware has a lot of overlap and similarity to Conti v2. So, the more of these things we find, the more kind of, I mean, essentially ransomware is going to start having the same problem that we were just talking about earlier for cybersecurity, right? The more integrated and the more overlap there is between these different ransomware services, these different ransomware groups, the easier it's going to be over time for cybersecurity experts to combat these ransomware threats by releasing things like decryptors, because if there's enough significant overlap between two encryptors, great, we've got most of the work done. If there's enough similar overlap between tactics and techniques and procedures, a lot of that detection is already going to be taken care of. So really interesting to see ransomware kind of going to start suffering from some of those same issues that we were just talking about earlier. But that is great news. We have just surpassed that half-hour mark, which means we need to release all of you.
Yeah, and I want to say thank you, Joshua. You're right. Sushi was potentially impacted. Actually, I think they fly the tuna these days. But anyways,
yeah, I wouldn't want sushi that was shipped out of
on the slow that we call the slow boat. No, I'll be all right.
Thank you so much for joining us for GPS Live for the week of July 7th. If you have been watching this on demand, thank you for giving us some of your time. Please feel free to drop comments on anything that you saw here, and we'll see that. If there are stories that you guys see throughout the week, go ahead and tag us in your comments on this video, and then we'll be able to potentially incorporate those into next week's broadcast. Until then, I have been and will continue to be Tristan Morris.
And I am Jonathan Singer, and I will see you on Threads, Blue Sky, and all the other alternatives.
And next time.
Mastodon.